Hey everybody, welcome to the inaugural episode of the GameSmith. I'm so happy you've decided to join me here today because in our first episode, we're going to be learning how to turn these seashells into stalagmites for use with your favorite tabletop role-playing game. So, crafting the base. We're going to simply start working with cardboard in our very first GameSmith YouTube video. So what we're going to do is start with some basic cardboard that you can find just about anywhere. And we want to identify the shape that we want to have our base be, the size that we want it to be. I'm a big fan of using found or recycled material, so just any old cardboard will do. I had this laying around. So we just cut this out. And then we want to reinforce this because this is going to be super bendy. This is going to fall apart really easily under the weight of our materials that we're going to put on top of it. So we want to reinforce this. Now we could double up the cardboard, we could put another thin sheet of cardboard underneath it, but for this particular build, I'm going to use a technique that I like to for thin cardboard pieces by using packing tape. Now the packing tape technique is really good for corrugated material. Just make sure you put it on the side of the cardboard where the corrugation is really sticking out quite obviously. So we could use it with keeping it at one layer, but I think I'm going to put 2 layers on this. And this will just simply reinforce the cardboard. If I was going to be painting the other side, this would also prevent the cardboard from curling, which is always good to do. So now that we have this excess here, we just want to cut this off real quick. Just cut it to shape. Don't worry about having too much on the edges. And just curl over the edges when you're done. Now in the case of this particular build, you don't have to worry about excess on the edges being entirely covered because we're going to be covering it up in our next step. So, next step, we're going to get some aluminum foil, some papier d'aluminum, or aluminium, depending on where in the world you are pronouncing this. And we just want to crumple it up. But make sure that when you crumple it up, be sure that it's not very tight, since we're going to be flattening this out. So what we want to do is create a textured surface and not actually create a ball of tinfoil. And when you're pulling this apart, be careful that you don't rip it like I did just here. And flatten this out. And what we're going to do is we're going to cover our base with this tin foil in order to create a textured surface. So we'll get a dollar store glue gun here. Cost me $4. We'll put it on the edge of our base. And then attach our aluminum to that. Now the glue that comes out of that glue gun is going to be 205 degrees Celsius or about 400 degrees Fahrenheit for our American cousins. So that's going to be really hot, and the tinfoil is going to transmit that heat very efficiently. So my suggestion is, rather than using your fingers, switch over to a stick of some kind and just press down with that. So this popsicle stick will prevent my fingers from getting burned. So then what we want to do is to put the glue on our cardboard surface. And then we will fold over our tinfoil on top using our popsicle stick to push down so we don't end up burning our fingers, because the aluminum will transmit the heat very well. It's better not to cover the entire surface at once. Just do it in stages. And then we'll add on to the end here. And when we're pressing down with our popsicle stick, make sure that we're not actually creating popsicle stick impressions on our surface, and that we're not pressing out our textured surface. Now we just want to cut this to have a bit of a shape around it. We'll keep our aluminum foil for the next project. And what we want to do is fold this over the edges. But we're not interested about having it attached to the bottom of the piece. All we want is to cover the corrugation here. So we just put our glue on the outside edge and fold this over, press that down, and make sure that the glue is affixing to the aluminum and the cardboard, but not over the edge, just along the edge. We'll let that harden, and then what we want to do after we know that the glue is hardened, we'll come back and we'll use a hobby knife or a crafting knife in order to cut away the excess from the outside edge. You want to make sure you're being safety conscious and always cut away from yourself when you're doing this. Now we're going to add our stalagmites. Now these are turret or screw shells that I got from the local dollar store. I got this entire bottle for about $4 Canadian. And these shells have a great shape and texture, and particularly for using them as stalagmites. So what I'm going to do is I've chosen a few different shells based upon their size. And it helps to choose these ahead of time and to come up with a plan of how you're going to, or where you're going to attach these onto my base. So I'm just going to put a little map for myself over where I'm going to be putting this. Shells. I want to leave a nice big space in the middle so I can hide a couple minis in there. So after my glue gun is all ready and hot, and I have identified the seashells that I want to use, it's a good idea to choose a pattern, or identify a pattern, or plan out a pattern of where you want to put these shells to begin with. Do you want to have a very large shell in the middle with smaller ones on the outside? Do you want to cluster a whole bunch of small ones together? Do you want to put only big ones together? It'll be helpful for you to plan this out ahead when you go to place the seashells. I just want to make sure that I have a gap in the middle here. So I try out a few patterns, and then once I've decided on that, I fill the little gap inside my shell with glue and cover the bottom. And then I put it on my base. And I just hold it there, and I let gravity do the work of pulling the glue down onto the surface of my base. Now I can use a fan nearby to quicken up the hardening time, but if you do that, you need to be aware that you're probably going to end up in a position where the glue is going to harden much more quickly, so if you're wanting to change the layout, that might be problematic. So I'm going to be a little impatient here and work quickly. I don't have a fan blowing on this, but I wanted to keep the video as short as possible. So I'll just let that go, and I'll start adding it on to another piece. Oh, here we go. It's falling over already. Didn't let that glue harden enough before I just started adding on to the next one. So then I need to make sure that I give these enough time to harden before I start adding more shells. So I want to drag this up, the glue up the side, so I can create a texture, a vertical texture to across the horizontal texture of the shells. It's important to be patient with this, because these will fall over if you are not. The glue is transmitting heat through the aluminum, so it will stay more fluid longer. So I'll just reinforce this big empty spot over here on the side. Now when I added this extra glue on the side, it also melted the glue that I had already put down, because the hot glue just melted the other glue that was hardening. And you can see here that my impatience is causing the shells to tip over. So you're going to want to make sure that the glue of each individual shell is secure and hard before you add the next one. So I'll just skip ahead here, and what I've done here is that I'm going to be adding some glue around the base of the shells, not only to reinforce, but to using this popsicle stick, I'm going to create this flow-like pattern of the hot glue that I've put around the bases. After all, the stalagmites are just limestone deposits that have dripped down from the ceiling of a cave, and they create flow patterns at the base of their stalagmite structures. So using this popsicle stick, I'll create those flow-like structures just to spread out the glue, and then I'll let gravity pull them out into natural shapes. Oops, got one that's trying to get away here. We'll lift these back up, and then we'll move on to the next step. So as far as details go, I think what I'm going to do is add a few scatter rocks here. So I have some decorative rocks from the local dollar store that I can add to the base. I'll just choose a few and then glue them in place. Bearing in mind that all I'm trying to do is just add a little bit of a surface feature to the cave-like structure, and I don't want to fill in the space between my stalagmite formations because I want to be able to hide minis back there. I can use it as cover, I can use it as difficult terrain, and I can use it as a hiding spot for a creature of some kind or an ambush. Awesome. So I've painted the base. You can do this by hand with just black acrylic paint, but I recommend that you use spray paint in order to get down into the little nooks and crannies here that you can see by that are left over from all of the texture of the aluminum foil. So any acrylic matte black spray will do. Check out my foundations video on priming or base painting for some helpful tips on that. Next, we're going to paint our stalagmites brown. To do that, I'm going to use tan and burnt umber in order to do that. And for the base, I'm going to use 2 tones of gray. I'm going to use a dark gray and a light gray. Now, for a simple terrain piece like this, 2 tones of color is plenty in order for it to be table ready. And then I'm going to add a white highlight or dry brush afterwards. Now when you're painting, you're always going to want to start from darkest to lightest color. Any color that you add first on top of your dark black base coat will always end up being darker than it appears, because the color is going to be absorbed by the black from the base coat underneath it. So if you start with the lighter coats, it's going to vanish quickly. So you want to start with the darker coats so that the lighter colors will show up brighter. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a radial brush here and just dab this dark gray thin this out a little bit. Just start dabbing it all over the surface. Now I don't want to get complete coverage over the black because I want to keep the illusion of dark shadows on my textured surface. So I don't want to press it down in between the little cracks that are left over from the aluminum foil texture. Just dab it over top. Then once the dark gray is dry, then you repeat the process with the light gray. So I've just added a little bit of water here to my gray because my paint was way too thick and it was globbing up my brush. So I'm going to switch over to this light gray and I'm going to load my brush a little bit. I want to take some of the globs out of this, so I'm going to just drag this over my napkin here, and then I'm going to dab it over the surface of my build. See, I'm trying not to get down in the cracks there. I'm just trying to add a little bit of highlight, not like I'm dry brushing, but some gray tones to show that the stone is in different colors. Now I'm going to work on painting the stalagmites, and I'm going to do that with the dark brown. Now this is going to work on the exact same principle. I'm going to load up my brush and just start dabbing it over the stalagmites. Again, don't want to get complete coverage with this, just about 80%, leaving the little cracks behind. Now that this is dried, I'm going to move on to using the tan. Now you might not be able to see how dark the brown is in the camera. It might look quite black to you, but while it is very dark, it is in fact brown to the naked eye. Then I want to go over this with the light brown, and I will just want to dab that over in splotchy, almost camouflage-like pattern. Get down in the cracks in between. And after that's done, you can see how we have what looks like these big mineral deposits all over these stalagmites. And then we're going to highlight our surface features, our surface texture, by dry brushing. So with our highlights, all we're going to do is dry brush. Now for a full explanation of dry brushing and all the different techniques there, I want you to send you over to my foundations video on dry brushing. That will explain everything you need there. So basically, dry brushing is just a way to highlight the texture of our build, so they show up brighter than they on the surface of our build. Now when it comes to dry brushing, it's my golden rule is less is more. The less dry brushing, the better. The less highlighting, the better. Get down into the nooks and crannies here. Then I want to do a bit of overbrushing. And overbrushing is just a highlighting technique in which you're simply applying extra paint to the edges with a very loaded brush, which is what I'm doing here with these rocks. Just get the outside edges of these big rocks here. And we'll wait for all of this to dry. So, that is all we really need. This is tabletop ready now. Got room for our minis inside. Perfect scatter terrain. So that's my take on stalagmites for my very first YouTube video. If you have any questions, comments, or feedbacks for me on my inaugural episode of The GameSmith, please leave those in the comments section down below. I'd really like to hear from you. And if you like what you saw or see the potential in what we're doing here at The GameSmith, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please take a look at my Patreon page and my website. I'll put the links in the section down below. And if you've hung around through all of this, I'll reward you by telling that episode 2 is going to be on icy stalagmites and will be available in just a few days. I hope you've enjoyed my first GameSmith episode, and I'm really looking forward to sharing all my crafting and tabletop gaming experience with you. I'll see you at the table.